Hello! I thought I'd just quickly slap together a video on what I discovered about replicating motion warping data between client and server and showing that, it works at different pings and latencies and whatnot. And so far the results have been good. I'm not sure if this is the exact perfect way to set this up, because there's not that much info out there about this. But from my testing here, this works pretty well, so I mean, you could use this in the interim so long. But let's get cracking. So first up, of course, enable motion warping in the project. Otherwise, this entire thing might be a bit confusing. You won't be able to find any of the stuff. But this is also vanilla Lyra. If you just download Lyra example project, you get a fully enabled gameplay ability system package and whatnot. And I went into the hero dash ability, and you can see it's set up quite nicely to begin with. First of all, it just does all the usual stuff. Check if it's locally controlled, grabs a montage and all the kind of stuff from this particular thing, sets the direction, and then goes ahead and checks to see if you're the authority or not. Of course, if you're not the authority, it actually goes and sends important info through to the server before the ability is replicated and played on the server side, but then proceeds to also play it locally, so that of course you get that lovely local prediction. And of course, all you do is just send that information through, and boom, the server does the exact same thing. And hopefully they sync up because of the magic of the character movement component. It handles root motion stuff quite well, so long as as long as everything else you're doing is relatively well synced up with the client and the server. But I mean, the rest of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory. If you go into this game ability, you should be able to see what's going on. But there's one difference here that you can point out is that this particular gameplay ability in vanilla Lyra uses this async root motion task. It is not playing a root motion animation necessarily. It's actually playing a root motion task. So in that case, as you can see here, with the animation itself, all I did was just duplicate it, and I added my own root motion to this animation to make it a root motion animation, and then enabled root motion. This would have been turned off in the normal animation that's available. Of course, also duplicated and created my own little dash forward montage, and over here, you can see the motion warping testing. These are very, I mean, they're not perfect. Also, by the way, everything set up here is not perfect. I wouldn't copy this code exactly because it's a bit messy, but I mean the general idea is here. So you can see I added two different motion warping of the notifiers over here. First up, the horizontal, and I also added a vertical component. And let me just pause for a second so you can see these settings. Here I just ignore the z-axis, warp translation, normal, skew warp, all that kind of stuff. Set up the name to be horizontal, wada. Very simple. You can just add those in by adding a motion warping state. Like I said, the actual setup of motion warping and whatnot, it's quite simple. I like it. It's pretty nice. So anyway, like there's two different versions here. One for horizontal and then like the next part vertical. And of course you'd cut this up based on the animation you're trying to make. And of course an animation, like an attack animation that uses root motion, that's just one action, would probably just have this node here, this one little translation one, unless you're attacking upwards or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I added these two just to sort of show how complicated it can get and also how these are replicated across the server. So let's start off with just the linear one, the translation one, instead of the actual vertical component one, the horizontal. So let's go ahead to the updated hero ability. This is a brand new ability I added. Of course, I went through the whole process of adding in the ability, adding in the inputs, all that kind of stuff, giving this ability to the actual default hero of Lyra, all that kind of stuff. And all I did in here to change this, you can see it's the same as this. Basically duplicated as well. I just removed all the stuff about selecting the montage and just forced it to use my particular motion warping montage. I could have just set that up in the defaults, but anyway. Then I just set up the direction just for it to be anything. And then, of course, all this is the same. Down crouch, it does things. And this little node here was just my little addition. So we can first start off by just showing you how the root motion itself works. At the moment, I'm not using motion warping whatsoever for this. I haven't set it up. So let me just start up the game quickly so you can see that the root motion itself works. Doesn't correct, all that kind of stuff. This is Lyra. This is the normal Lyra dash. Even the normal Lyra dash has some corrections sometimes, though. I've got server corrections showing, so you can see what's going on. At the moment, there's 0 ping, 0 latency. But if I hit my particular root motion button, you can see I made the leap pretty long, pretty exaggerated. That was completely by accident. I just sort of, did it at the time. But at least it's, working on client and server. And if I was to actually go ahead and add in some lag, net packet lag, that's what we're looking for. Let's make it pretty exaggerated. Let's make it like 300 ping. It initially starts off and it gives you some corrections when it freaks out. If I was to Oops, I hit the K button, which killed me instantly. Give me a secondary spawn. I fat fingered that one, okay. That was interesting. So, you don't die when you push the button when you have lag. And you can see it's still working fine. No corrections at the moment. Even if I change the control rotation, it's fine. But you do notice a few more corrections when you start rotating the character during a root motioning, but only sometimes. So that's all seems to be fine and dandy, right? So let's go ahead and start playing around with the motion warping. So here, it's pretty standard. Let me just reconnect this. So you can see all I do is just grab the hero. This is happening locally. That's important to note that this particular section right here is happening locally. You can see here's the has authority node. The client itself is going to inform the server what it wants to do with its location and stuff like that between these motion warping targets. What's important to note is that you should, in like a multiplayer game, probably just sanity check this on the server using a validation node. And all that'll do is just on the server be like, okay, is the character or is the player trying to teleport through a wall? Are they trying to do this kind of stuff? And you can then validate that sort of stuff on the server before you accept the ability. So that's important to note that here the client is telling the server what to do, so be careful of that. Don't just accept what the clients are trying to say all the time in a competitive environment. I mean, if you're making just a normal multiplayer game where, you know, co-op versus AI, whatever the case is, it doesn't really matter what the clients are doing, whatever the case is. I mean, that's up to you how you're designing your system. But yeah, in this case, yeah, just keep that in mind. I haven't done any validation code whatsoever. I'm just saying, cool, client, I believe you. So here we go. We've got the default hero. We're grabbing the motion warping. Oh, important note: you have to add in this little motion warping component to your actual pawn. And there, I'm just setting the adding or updating the warp target. All I'm doing there is I'm creating a new little warp target bit of data here. Got the correct name for the horizontal section. Remember the section over here. I'm just saying, okay, I want you to motion warp forward 500 units and all that kind of stuff. The rotation here isn't that important. I just added it because I'm actually ignoring rotation, as you can see here. And this section here involves the vertical component, but we'll get to that after this little test here. Oh, and also, we don't want that to play. So at the moment, you can see over here. So basically, if you are not the server, obviously now we're using the same set info kind of node over here, just sending in the additional information, which is just going to be the warp targets, and that's simple enough, right? You just add in 2 more things, and then of course, when this hits the server, it's going to go and see, okay, I have all this information, and then we actually want to do the same thing where we grab the motion warping node of the local character, or the authoritative version of the character over on the server, set the motion warping target, and then of course do the usual thing with as just the same as this dashboard. You would commit the ability and then play the actual montage on this side. Except now, of course, we're skipping the async module over here. Completely just remove that from the whole thing here because we're no longer using the root motion task. We're now using an actual root motion animation, which is important to keep in mind. So that's the part that also changed between the two abilities. And then of course, in this case, important thing is like obviously over here is where the ability would end before, but now we're just going to say on the end of the montage, then end the ability. Always make sure you end the ability. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to cast other abilities. You're going to run into some issues. So yeah, and then that's simple enough, right? You just play the montage on the server, and then after sending through the information, just play it on both. Simple enough, and let's see how that works. So it takes a little while for my PC to start up these instances of Lyra. Unfortunately, the client, the server's a bit far away there, but you can still see I'm still running at a 300 ping. It's important to keep that in mind. This is still a 300 ping instance of the client. So you can see there are some corrections going on, just normally. But you can see the ability's mostly working, except for that one little correction that happened back there. So you can see it still corrects, but even the normal dash will correct occasionally. You can see there. Unfortunately, at high pings, you can't really avoid correction. But the important thing is that you can actually see how weird it looks, because it's not going as far as it did before. It's actually lowered the strength of it. But of course, a lower ping, you get fewer corrections. But the important thing is to see it actually working on the server. Let's say now I was not to actually send this through to the server. We're just going to go straight and commit the ability. You'll see quite a bit of a difference here. A lot of rubber banding Still 300 ping, but of course now you can see a teleport on the client side, because remember, you can see what's happening on the server side, how much further they go. Because, you know, the ability itself, it goes a lot further than that. But you can see locally it's saying, oh, I'm ending there, and then it teleports forward according to the authority server position, so you can see that information is not being synced through, which is why it's important to send this information through, because the motion warping component itself is not network replicated out the box, at the moment at least. It might be changed in the future. So now that we've got that particular situation going, the horizontal component's not working properly. Demonstrate it again. I might actually just lower the ping a little bit so we can have fewer corrections. Well, hopefully have fewer corrections. Let's make it 150 ping. 150 ping is what you might see. You can see even the normal dash has a few corrections, still figuring itself out. But now, the motion warping dash is here. As you can see, even if I was to change the control rotation, it seems to be replicating fine to the server. Local prediction is working fine. We still have I actually bumped into the pawn there, which is why I had a bit of a freak out. If you bump into things with a bit of ping, you're going to start seeing some more corrections. But you can see this is the motion warping ability right here, and it's pretty decently stable, without having to worry about writing any new sort of prediction code in the character moving component. Whatever, this seems to be working okay, just so long as you actually replicate the motion warping data through to the server. And to sort of demonstrate that a bit further, okay, one little note before I go into this part is that what I'm doing here, in order to get vertical movement coming out of the character moving component, you actually need to be in the flying mode. That's important to keep in mind. So it will completely ignore Z root motion movement. This is in multiplayer or single player. The CMC, the character movement component, ignores all Z-axis vertical movement of any root motion montage, or whatever the case is, unless you're in flying. You can actually go and see where that code is written if you want to create your own character moving component and remove that a little bit. If you want to actually have some vertical root motion, you can actually edit the character moving component to fix that. But we're using the vanilla system at the moment. So before I actually play the montage, I now want to enter flying. So now what's important about me doing this here is that it's not optimal to do it this way, because here you're just saying, okay, locally set the movement mode, and then you tell the server, okay, also set the movement mode. That works okay-ish. But when you're changing movement modes this rapidly and you want things to do like proper sort of root motion and whatnot, it's often best to have your movement mode switching also be updated via packed movement, or similar sort of system inside of the character movement, that whole big system and that sort of controls local prediction and whatnot. Yeah, it's better to do your movement mode switching there to properly update the server every single tick, so that can be replicated properly. But like, this works okay. This is not. It's going to give you a couple more corrections more often, though, I've noticed. Unfortunately, I didn't do the whole test with the with the setup using packed movement, but you'll see the rest now. So now that that's enabled, also obviously I want to also add in the vertical component here, and you can see here, same sort of thing. All I'm doing is just adding a Z up. Well, of course, I'm also accounting for the fact that it should be in a certain position here. Oh, that actually might be a bug. Basically, though, you can see I've set it up so that it goes 500 units up. And bam, that's the vertical component there. Come down here to the send info, and you can see here I've removed the vertical component. Let me add that back in. So now, the local client will say, okay, I've got vertical movement. It'll tell the server it has vertical movement. It'll update on the server side and the client side, and then it will set both sides to be in the flying movement mode, and then it will play the montage to activate both the horizontal and then the vertical component part. And as you can see in the actual animation here, it'll first do horizontal, and then as soon as it hits this part of the animation, it would do a vertical, like, upwards jump. You'll see it's quite a bit of a jolt. Unfortunately, like I said, this isn't as smoothly implemented in the animation, so it might look janky, just because the animation itself looks janky. So if you had a far more sophisticated sort of motion warping, like an animation, like integration here, it would look better, effectively. But this is just demonstrating how it works. And also, when we end the ability, I'm just going to set it back so that the characters go back to falling again, so that you're not stuck in flying. Alright, and you can see everything stays the same. All I'm doing now is that I'm just adding the new component, same thing, same exact setup as here, just adding vertical movement to it. And we're telling it to play the montage based on the motion warping stuff, and we're sending the information to the server. Remember, the client's still simulating at 150 ping. Oops. Let's use the red one instead. So, normal Lyra dash, and now our new weird funky one. As you can see, still get some corrections. I bumped into the ceiling and stuff like that. But it's actually adding both movement components to it. But like I said, the corrections here I think have more to do with that movement mode switching than the actual root motion replication itself. So to keep that in mind, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on. But I just wanted to show you that the vertical component works, but when it goes to that movement mode switching, it's best to use the packed movement to set it up properly, rather than just doing it via these RPCs. So anyway, that's at least just demonstrating how it works. You can see I'm still getting a couple of corrections. At least it's actually replicating. And if I didn't have such severe sort of lag, and also if it was in a bit of a better environment like I was there, you can see the actual corrections disappear. As long as I'm not bumping into things, the corrections disappear. And it works quite well. You can see the corrections here, they've gone. And this is at 150 ping, and if I was to actually make the ping way worse, this is going to be a bit janky. You see corrections happening. Woo! The teleporting is a bit weird at high ping. But yeah, there we go. You can see the actual stuff working here. But of course, higher ping, more corrections are to be expected. Really enough? That was... But yeah, you can get the idea. Let's lower the ping a little bit. Let's make it like 50. It's already happier. We're still getting some corrections. But as mentioned, if you're not buffing into things, it actually works decently. And also, I think a lot of it, like I said, that's more to do with the movement mode switching than anything else. You kind of saw that the motion warping horizontal stuff worked decently without this, but this was just sort of a test to show you that it can work. For example, if you're doing a parkour ability, you'd obviously want to have the character have both a Z and an X movement, or whatever the case is. So that's important for that. But like I said, you just got to make sure that movement mode switching occurs in a better place. Because it's not perfect. But yeah. Like as mentioned, at least you saw that the actual movement itself works fine along horizontally in the normal sort of. So basically, motion warping simplification works quite well in this way. And you know, you can test that as well. Let me know if it works for you. If you need more information on how it's set up, hopefully I told you everything you need to know. I didn't do anything else. Like I said, took this animation, added root motion animation, added the motion warping stuff in. Took the same ability from Lyra. Also, if you're not using gameplay ability system, the same thing can be set up almost exactly the same way, where like you just check to see when the button's pushed or when the ability is activated. Are you locally controlled? Do you have authority? Do all these checks. Of course, send that information through to the server as we did here. Set that information up on the server, and then of course play on both. Set up the movement mode or the montages. Let's ignore that for now. Set up the montages, and then yeah, just play around, do your thing, and that should replicate well enough. So yeah, motion warping replication is totally doable, and it seems to work pretty well with even high sort of client pings, as you saw. There are naturally going to be some corrections and stuff at higher pings. That's just the nature of online games. But for the most part, it works pretty well because of the built-in character moving component root motion replication. It's a pretty decent system, and it seems to work quite well with motion warping as well at the moment, which is exciting. So long as, once again, the server knows about the information. Alrighty, enough meandering about. I think that's good enough for this video. Let me know if that helps, and also if it works your side, or if you have a better solution, a smarter solution. Let me know. If you want more information on the whole talk I talked about, the movement mode stuff, I can set you up with that particular stuff. But yeah, that's a completely different topic and a much longer, more complex topic. But if you're just doing animations, if you're just doing motion warping animations, it'll work fine in blueprints. You can do it using the built-in character moving component, like as demonstrated here, as long as you follow this kind of logic, where you just set it up, sending it through, set it on the server, and then yeah, play on both, and it'll work both locally and on the server, and you'll get decent, like pretty decent feeling gameplay on the client, regardless. Well, touch wood, regardless of latency. Anyway, have a good one.